Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Pharoahe Monch, titled PTSD, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. You know, when Eminem released Rap God last year, I wonder how many people saw the underground rapper Pharoahe Monch referenced in the lyrics and thought, I wonder who that is. Or thought, you know, I've heard the name, but if Eminem referenced him as a good thing, he must be a good rapper, so it can't hurt to check him out, right? And you know, I'm not too proud to admit that I'm going to include myself in that second category. Because, you know, I'd heard of Pharoahe Monch's strange and twisted career before, starting in the underground with the critically acclaimed duo Organized Confusion with Prince Poetry, before releasing his debut instant classic album Internal Affairs in 1999, and then vanishing from rap music for a good 8 years after a sampling controversy, before a comeback and complete shift in style and content with Desire in 2007. But look, I had figured he was just not an artist that I had really explored in the past, so I figured that once again, it was a good opportunity to finally acquaint myself with an artist in my backlog that I just hadn't had time to cover. And you know what? It's a damn good thing I did, because Pharoahe Monch represents almost everything I love in rap music. A lot of personality and charisma, a taste for eclectic beats and production, an actual sense of humor, and most of all, intelligent and layered wordplay that really did deserve all the praise it got. And with the benefit of that knowledge going in, I could see traces of his multi-syllabic flow and delivery in so many rappers in hindsight who followed him that it's honestly startling that he isn't more famous outside of the critical sphere, considering his really broad influence. But when Pharoahe Monch returned to hip-hop in 2007, he came back with a decidedly different, not exactly mainstream accessible edge. Less the hard-spitting yet definitely intelligent gangster rap that characterized his debut, and more of a conscious political angle, which doesn't really tend to get popular. Now, in theory, I've got no issues with this. Of the many rappers who have tackled politics and serious issues in their music, Pharoahe Monch would probably be one of the few who deliver his material with any degree of respectable nuance. But when he released his third album, We Are Renegades, in 2011, I found myself a little bit dissatisfied with it. The political arguments felt distinctly disjointed to me, the wordplay wasn't quite as tight, the heavier beats and production moved away from the soul samples that most of the time I felt they lacked overall cohesion, and this all spoke to a lack of singular focus on the album. Sure, it was still very good, and I liked much of the content that he brought up, but I felt that his presentation just suffered a little bit in terms of bringing it to the table, especially in comparison with his past. On top of that, the dystopian framing device of the album felt a little bit overwrought and hyperbolic to me. Not so much bad, it's just lacking somewhat in subtlety. And then as such, I wasn't quite sure what we would be getting with Pharoahe Monch's newest album, Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. The album did promise a more personal focus, a touch that I felt was somewhat missing from We Are Renegades, but given as that it was a follow-up to that album, that's at least how it was marketed, I had no idea what he's planning on doing. So I picked up the album hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. About as much as the worst that you get with Pharoahe Monch. How'd it go? This is an interesting one because while I definitely really quite like Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder by Pharoahe Monch, I can't quite say it works all the way through as an artistic piece or as quite as effective as it could have been. It's definitely an improvement on We Are Renegades, almost across the board, but at the same time, it suffers a similar problem to that album. But to discuss that problem, I'm gonna need to put up a spoiler warning right here before going really deep into this record. And if you want the fast and dirty on it, very good, definitely worth your time. Check this out if you're looking for a thinking man's brand of hip-hop. Otherwise, spoiler warning going up now. You have been warned. So first, let's get the obvious positives out of the way. Pharoahe Monch, still one of the best technical lyricists in the game right now, both in terms of creativity and just sheer raw technique and talent. I went through this album line by line in the lyrics on Rap Genius, and while there are a few segments that don't quite strike me as consistently amazing, I wasn't the biggest fan of the stuttering on Time 2, and I didn't really like the howling on Scream, even though I get the context for the reason why he did that vocal technique on both positions. compositions, and yeah, there's a few lines I won't consider stellar, but for the most part, A Tighter Focus has done this record a lot of good in terms of lyricism. And it definitely helps that whenever he pulls on guest stars, namely Denon, Black Thought, and Talib Kweli, it feels incredibly cohesive with the overall atmosphere of the tracks and as the album as a whole. And on a similar note, the greater focus has translated to better instrumentals and better production as well, with the downbeat and dark tone manifesting in the grimier elements of the production, the simmering guitars, and the slightly off-kilter synth lines and almost brittle beats at some points. Pharoahe Monch has always had a liking for guitar and bass-driven hip-hop for years now, and honestly, this is probably one of the best manifestations of that liking, with the menacing melody lines of Losing My Line, Damage, and Jungle, plus the thick bass in Time 2, Rapid Eye Move, and Broken Again. It adds a ton of exposed and raw atmosphere to these songs. You know what, I don't often say this, but I really like how Pharoahe Monch utilizes some of the backing vocals on a few of these tracks. It's a chorus line behind him in the more expansive and epic and outwardly focused songs, which makes their absence in the more introspective, quieter moments on this album all the more sharply defined. If I do have a criticism on the production, and I do, it's that some of the tracks feel a little bit top-heavy and exaggerated in the mix, and a greater breadth of sounds might have given some tracks a greater feeling of resonant depth, without a need to go as over-the-top as he does on the second-to-last track on this album. We'll get to that. But first, we must talk about the meat of this discussion: lyrics and themes. So, let's get this out of the way first. Of course, there's a political connotation in Pharoahe Monch's exploration of post-traumatic stress disorder, both in discussing the mental health of US servicemen returning from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of Pharoahe Monch's own struggles of depression and drugs. It's a good parallel, it's well executed here. But as such, if you're looking for the gleeful yet insightful chaos of internal affairs and to a lesser extent on desire, you're not really gonna get that. Now, that's not saying there aren't tracks where Pharoahe Monch isn't aggressively spitting, but the tone of those tracks is a lot more bleak and dark. There's a lot more pent-up rage on this album, and not without good reason. And thus, the anti-establishment tracks like Bad MF and Scream, they land with a little bit more gravitas and nuance than I was expecting. Sure, they're broad, exaggerated swipes at the mainstream scene, but they're understandable coming from a rapper who might not be in his right mind. Something that is established early and intentionally on this record and frequently referenced. The framing of this album is damn near impeccable. It's what makes the violent imagery in songs like Damage as the conclusion of the Bullet trilogy, which is stretched throughout Pharoahe Monch's career, and on Rapid Eye Movement, feels so visceral, but also a little bit desperate and filled with very real emotional subtext. Those combined with skits like Heroin Addict, they have the feel of a very powerful and very strong rapper just kind of spinning out of control into his own mind. And even beyond that though, what helps PTSD really rise really highly in my book is A Tighter Focus, because this is much more of an introspective story that's grounded in Pharoahe Monch's human struggles with depression and drugs. And when the album sticks very close to the theme, it makes the story very relatable, very poignant, and very politically relevant, I would add. Sure, the attacks on the pharmaceutical industry might be a little bit heavy-handed and the satire might be a little bit broad, but when they come from such a very real, vulnerable place, they gain a ton of emotional resonance. And the songs like Broken Again, Losing My Mind, and the title track, they're genuinely moving songs. And Dream is such a powerful climax as it feels like a revitalization of Pharoahe Monch's spirit that's very earned and very meaningful and relevant. And then the album's recollection facility framing device activates, telling Pharoahe Monch that he's now in the future and is sentenced from life imprisonment for overriding some thought police decree, then tying the album back to We Are Renegades and ending with the punch of the Grand Illusion remix, a song from the previous album now with symphonic elements and a slight retooling of the second verse, and that's pretty much it. Now, look, on the one hand, I completely get why he did this. Tying the albums together, it has thematic resonance, it fits the overarching narrative that he's trying to create, and generally highlights that even if we manage to find some feeling of personal renewal, we're still living in a dystopia that's just waiting to happen. But here's why I don't quite think it works. PTSD as a whole, as an album, has a much more personal story, both in tone and in lyrical execution. And it touches on issues that were very directly intimate to Pharoahe Monch. There was stuff that he was very much dealing with. And while the elements in the instrumentation and the political commentary might be similar, they're framed in a much better light on this album that reflects a greater degree of nuance and tighter focus. It's a different type of story than what he was looking to tell on We Are Renegades. And thus, when when he ties it so directly to that album, it feels a little bit jarring to me, and it really hurts the overall atmosphere of the album. But here's the funny thing. Outside of the ending, this album is genuinely great and very compelling in terms of narrative, tone, and how he's just playing kick-ass songs and wordplay, songs that can be enjoyed on multiple levels. In a way, I'm gonna make a broad reference here. I'm reminded of the progressive metal album, The Human Equation by Ayreon, back from 2004, which is one of my favorite albums of all time, and also ends on an off-kilter sci-fi note that felt tonally inconsistent, yet kinda works in the overarching narrative for explaining some of the parts of the songs. And yet on this one, with the personal ties to Pharoahe Monch's story itself and the more intimate execution, I don't quite think it sticks the landing as well. With that in mind though, look, I do enjoy The Grand Illusion as the song, and the remix isn't half bad either, it just doesn't work quite as well. But in the end, I'm gonna weigh on the positive and support a rapper that I really do like and give this album an 8 out of 10. Definitely check out Pharoahe Monch. He's one of the best in the rap game, and he deserves a lot more credit than he gets, and this might be one of the most shining and relevant examples. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming out that you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, and I'll see you next time.